Most people know Edgar Allan Poe for his horror short stories and his narrative poem, The Raven. Poe's body of work spans further into science fiction, satire, and detective stories. He also wrote many other poems other than The Raven, for the first published work was a collection called Tamerlane and Other Poems.
Poe had moved to Boston in 1827 to find work and try to make a life for himself away from his foster father. Despite the success his birth mother had there as an actress, Poe was unable to break into the social and intellectual circles, forcing him to work at a warehouse, then as a writer for a little-known paper. He eventually lied about his age and name to join the army. He arrived in Boston with a collection of manuscript poems written while he was a student at the University of Virginia. Included was his epic poem Tamerlane, a poem about a 14th century Turkish warlord who leaves his love Ada for adventure and conquest, only to experience regret in the end. In the spring of 1827, he paid 18-year-old Calvin F.S. Thomas, whose family may have been known by Poe's birth parents, to print his 40-page collection. The slim book was pamphlet-sized, 6 3/4 by 4.5 inches. Poe was 18 years old and already enlisted when it was released in June or July. Though some accounts say 40 copies were printed, the total number is still disputed with figures between 20 to 200. Regardless of the original amount, there are only about 12 surviving copies in varying states, with a number of facsimiles of the book printed as well. Tamerlane was printed anonymously, with credit attributed to a Bostonian. There are no signed copies of the book, and Poe didn't even keep a copy for himself. No reviews of the book were written, and only a few notices mentioned it. The book title did appear in a list in a 3-volume anthology of American poetry in 1829. The poem's themes are typical of the Romantic poets Poe was reading, and his own limited experience. Youthful loss, idealistic longing, and universal truths, but it also contains an underlying sense of melancholy. Sound familiar? The poems are inspired in part by the works of Percy Bysshe Shelley, with the greatest inspiration derived from the works of Lord Byron. Poe admired Byron for his rebellious reputation and his skills as a poet. Poe published a second collection, Al-Araf, Tamerlane, and Minor Poems in 1829, using his name, and included revised versions of 5 of the 9 poems from Tamerlane. When the second edition was published, no one believed his claims of an earlier edition. In fact, no copy was known until 1876, when one was found in the library of the British Museum, where it had been sent as part of a miscellaneous collection of American books in 1860. A second copy was not found until 1890 in Boston. Poe reworked some of these original poems over time, so it's interesting to read the originals to see how they evolved. As mentioned before, it's believed only a dozen copies of the original printing of Tamerlane and Other Poems remain, making it one of the rarest of first editions in American literature. Ironically, the value of one copy today is worth more than Poe ever made in his entire short life. This rare status was recognized in 1925 by the Saturday Evening Post. It ran the article, "Have you a Tamerlane in your attic?" After publication, Ada S. Dodd in Worcester, Massachusetts searched and found a copy, prompting Americans to search as well. Today, most of the surviving copies are owned by libraries and museums. 2 copies, for example, were purchased by the Huntington Library in New York in 1915. 1 copy is on display as part of the collection at the Poe Museum in Richmond, Virginia. Though copies do not circulate often, they command super high prices when they do. One sold at auction for $125,000, and later another sold for $198,000. In December of 2009, a copy from the William E. Self Collection sold in New York for $662,500, a record price paid for a work of American literature.
What do you think about Poe's first book of poems? Have you read any of them? Let us know in the comments, and we'll see you next time.